Good morning, watchers. Welcome to Brother Sal's Sunday Gathering at the Storehouse, our weekly commentary on world events. We first started in 1996 and have become more relevant ever since. Today, posting 2 shows per week to our YouTube channels, BroSal and Philadelphia Church. For 20 years, we have integrated the historical landscape that unfolds daily with the prophetic analysis anticipated by eschatology. We bring you non-traditional insights and uncensored discussion of issues purposely ignored by media of all kinds. Join us now for the only discussion of its kind. And joining me again this week is my son Tony. Welcome, Tony. What do you have for us?
Good morning, Dad. Thanks for having me on the show. There's so much going on week to week now. It's, I'm always talking about some sort of context because I think the last few months, what we've seen, the terrorism, which, it's like faded into the background now. They don't talk about it every day, even though we just had dozens of people killed, 50 people at least, they're saying, and 100 injured over there in Damascus or near Damascus to derail these peace talks. And, there's been a lot of stuff in Africa going on as well, terrorism that hasn't stopped. And yet, remember how intense it was when there was the threat, when they closed the Los Angeles school after the Paris attacks, and right? We were all in a state of super tension. And then Christmas came along, and like I pointed out, Jesus, it's like everybody forgot about everything. And then all of a sudden, now it's all back. But the reason I wanted to start out this way today is because it's back, but what's back? The terrorism, yeah, but is that the front page? No. What's the front page these days? Funny enough, it's, well, let's get to it. Let me take these one at a time because I want to try and there's a lot of articles that I think sketch what's going on today. And so if I could get through some of them. Dozens killed by bombs in Syria, clouding UN peace session. So this is the one I was just mentioning. It's an article from today out of the AP by Bassem Emru. And it's just reporting that not only the killings and that they're claimed by Islamic State, and funny it says that Syrian state TV showed several burning cars and a scorched bus, as well as blown out windows, twisted metal, and large holes in the facade of a nearby apartment building. The golden domed Shiite shrine itself was not damaged. This all took place next to a Shiite shrine in Damascus, further, deepening that Shia-Sunni divide. And I just thought when I was reading this article, geez, that's more than they've shown us with the, 5-year civil war and ISIS and 1,000 bombing raids, and I've seen maybe one burnt out car at a time. Nothing actually on fire still. Smoke in the background maybe. But this, 50 people were killed by one incident, and they got several burning cars, scorched bus, blown out windows, twisted metal, and large holes in the facade of a nearby apartment building. Because this is what you see when bombs blow up. There's all the wreckage of it. So it's just, I thought that was interesting, since I thought, several burning cars at least, that gives you an idea of the radius of the bomb, We're dropping bombs, the most sophisticated bombs from the most sophisticated armies in the world for a year, and then they show me a picture of some old car burnt up, right? Anyway. So yeah, this is the bombing. The bombings, it says, cast a shadow over the Geneva talks, the first UN effort since 2014 to try to end the conflict that's killed at least 250,000 people, forced millions to flee the country, and given an opening to IS militants to capture territory. I was trying to get to the part of this here toward the end where they talk about the problem now with the peace talks. Let's see. Ahrar al-Sham and the Army of Islam, two Islamic groups fighting to overthrow Assad, agreed to take part in the Geneva talks. The ultra-conservative Ahrar al-Sham is not part of the team sent to Geneva, but the delegation is named Army of Islam official Mohammed Alouche as its chief negotiator. Alouche told AP he is heading to Geneva for the talks. While virtually all parties agree that Islamic State and the Al-Qaeda-linked Nusra Front should be excluded from the talks, the two sides are divided over Ahrar al-Sham and the Army of Islam. The mainstream opposition views both as fellow rebels, despite their ideological differences, while Syria's government and Russia view them as extremists. So we're going to get more into that today, Dad. But that's what we're facing this week, or in the moment. We got these peace talks supposedly that are supposed to stop the fighting in Syria, and yet the peace talks, as I'm reading it, seem to only exacerbate the situation because the world wants there to be peace, but nobody can agree on who even should be included in the peace talks, right? Russia wants Assad in there, but the West says Assad can't be in there. The West wants these rebel groups like this Army of Islam and such to be represented. I think they mentioned in another article they're Saudi-backed. And Russia and Syria say, well, no way. These guys are terrorists. How can you negotiate with them? So just trying to talk about it is almost what I'm starting to see, Dad, is it's presenting this quagmire, the word that seems to be the catchphrase of our time with regard to the Middle East. It's this quagmire waiting to be that they're showing us. I mean, I'm starting to see that they've been talking peace process most of my life, right? Most of my adult life we've been involved in the peace process, which has resulted in more weapons, more war, more destruction, more division, right? It went from the Palestinians launching, mortars at Israel, and Israel reacting harshly to that, to, say 20 years ago, to, all out territory conflict, the rise of these extremist groups, all this kind of thing that's happened in this last 20 years to bring us to where we are today, where they're talking about now peace talks. Whoops, I'm starting to read between the lines. Ouch. Peace talks is starting to sound this week, as I'm reading the articles, Dad, like code for endless war. See, they're not making any peace in Syria. This is all the wag the dog. This is the process you go through to keep fueling the fire to get to a point where you can have an Armageddon over there, I think. I mean, I'm seeing it. Anyway, I'm going to try and bring that out more in this, in one of the articles that I found this week, Dad. But, it jibes with everything I've been feeling with the buildup of arms, this division between the Shia and the Sunni that Sheikh Hossein, has been teaching for some time, is the deeper NATO play to divide the Shia and the Sunni, and I've sort of tried to correlate that with the idea that there's this prediction for World War III that at least goes back to 1958 and William Guy Carr claiming that it come from a much earlier time, but even if we just grant it from there, they're going to foment the agents of the in Israel and Islam to foment the aggression between these two people in such a way as to lead to their mutual annihilation. You knew that all the way back in 58, 10 years after you just, started the state of Israel. You already could predict the way the World War was going to come out to foment both their annihilation, perhaps in an Orwellian, fictionalized sense, but I don't know, there's a lot to it when you consider also this scourge that's predicted to come with it, so bad that the whole world has to defend itself against it. So anyway, I'm trying to draw some of these lines together, Dad, with what's going on today and what we're looking for, and the timing, because it's all striking me as I'm starting to see the stretched out timing of it all. That even if the covenant were to somehow be struck soon, in the next year or two, the wars don't even start for 3.5 years after that, which puts us to, at least 5 years if we were to get to some sort of covenant in this next year and a half, let's say, the 7-year covenant with many that we're anticipating. That just shows you we're 5 years away from the breaking of that covenant and the beginning of this, the real warring, the real killing, all this stuff that's being set up now. It's going to be preceded, we expect, by 3.5 years of some sort of the good guys on the prowl, is the way I'm starting to see, Revelation, the opening of the seal, the white horse is a righteous, armed, he's carrying a bow. He's not a priest. He's not a politician. He's a warrior, but he's a righteous warrior. And he's given a crown, and he goes forth conquering and to conquer. So, it would seem to indicate he goes forth, conquering in the form of righteousness, or he brings with him this righteous story that he's conquering with. And so it would seem that for the first 3.5 years, this is the sort of look we're going to have. And I say that's what we're setting up for now, the need for all this. That's why we talk peace talks, and, everybody talks about how to solve, how they're going to, stop the bloodshed. Nobody talks about where the bloodshed's really come from in reality. I mean, Bashar Assad has not killed 250,000 people over there. People were not running out of his country a few years ago, even though he's been in power quite a long time. All this stuff, I don't know how to, let people in on the insight, because I don't have to go over it every time, Dad. The idea that you have to see somebody pulling these strings. What's been going on for years there that the Assad family's been in charge and people haven't been fleeing? There hasn't been civil war. He's been okay with us. I mean, I don't know how deep I want to get off track every week to try and keep reestablishing that the way things happen in the world for 50 or 60 years, from Independencia in Chile and the bringing in of the warlord massacreist, that followed him. What was his name? That little sucker in Chile for all those years, it finally died. This is the MO of the Shah of Iran, Mubarak in Egypt, the Kingdom of Jordan, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, what's gone on in Ukraine recently, right? It's a pretty simple process when you think about it, Dad. If I have the money and the influence to support whoever I want, especially if I happen to make weaponry, and I can go to any country or any leader and say, I'd really appreciate it if you'd make laws that favored my national, international, multinational interests. And the leader says, yeah, but that's not good for my people. That's not good for us. I'm going to do something different. And they say, yeah, but you see, the difference is if you go with the people's version, you don't make enough money to buy the weapons that your enemy has. And they say, yeah, but my enemy doesn't have any weapons. Yeah, but now he does, right? And so it's real easy to get your way or to supply the other party with weapons and now propagandize that they're the freedom fighters going against the terrorist regime. And suddenly a regime that might have been there for 100 years, and you don't find many things much closer than regimes like Libya, right? I mean, that guy led the revolution as a young man in the 50s. And so we either have to say that he's been there slaughtering people all along to keep his family in power. So then show me that. Don't just tell me that. Show me the evidence of that. Who's fleeing his country over the last 50 years, 40 years that Gaddafi was in charge? How many people are fleeing because of the mass, intolerance and terrorism within the country on their own dissidents? How many dissidents are they, and how are they being put down? And how bad is it that they're, that the whole world has to go in there and take out this leader that just happened to have one of the highest standards of living in the world, certainly the highest in Africa, had undertaken the greatest, one of the greatest engineering feats in modern times by building that river across the desert, that man-made river tapping into the primary water source thousands of feet below the Earth's crust, and pumping it across the desert 3,000 miles or something, 4,000 kilometers maybe. That's one of the greatest engineering feats of modern mankind. This guy, so show me the evidence. How bad was it over there? Same thing with Assad, because I can show you where Martin Luther King was killed and Robert Kennedy and John Kennedy's brains was blown out. And there's a lot of evidence of sort of whistleblowers and other people that are killed in the good old USA of A and every other, so-called free country. It's just those countries have a deeper system in place, right? Most of their corruption is done by the people that drive around in the limousines or are driven around in their limousines, in their fancy suits and fly first class. They're the real criminals, where in these countries that have already been raped, for their resources, they're run more like a military dictatorship because it's the only way to keep that country selling off all its resources, underneath the people's noses, because the people usually know about it, is my experience. Mexicans are quite aware that the government steals all their resources and gives them minimum, standard of living. So I assume it's the same all over, and so in these countries you keep more of a militaristic face. But in the countries that's stolen everything, the England, the America, and their offshoots in the world, those type of countries, South Africa, Australia, you present a whole different face to the public. These look like our clean, polished people that we want to be like. But don't think they're not having the people taken out of their way, right up to presidents and whoever's in the way. And so, again, the evidence is there. I know what we've been doing in my country, in my world, all my life, and all my country's history. I don't know what's gone on in Syria. I haven't seen any evidence that supports what the world has turned that country into. Just like Iraq, weapons of mass destruction, huh? Have we found any yet? Was the rule under Saddam Hussein, was that country, I don't know what's really true, but all the things I've seen, Dad, seem to support the idea that whatever was going under Saddam, and remember, he was the guy we were supporting. He was getting his weapons from us, just like Saudi Arabia, just like Jordan, just like Egypt for so long. So to some degree, we had some influence in a country who's based on a militaristic profile, and we're the ones that give them the guns. We must have some influence, and that's why I say to one of the people who I think listens to us kind of regularly now and asked some time back about why is it Saudi Arabia isn't building churches like we're building mosques, and I say it's not an accident. We keep them hard line. There's no reason that we wouldn't use our influence to moderate if that were our goal. We certainly have the influence, and same thing over Jordan, who is used to be the more moderate. He's the one that made peace with Israel. Egypt made peace with Israel. But anyway, Dad, I'm trying to keep. I feel the need to always paint this background every week that gives people a way to look at the news, whichever news stories you're reading, that play into something the way I see it, the insight the way I've got it over all these years playing out. And, I'm saying that what's going on right now with Syria is no different than what's going on in the Ukraine or what's gone on in any of these regimes where we fund the rebel army and create we create this war in that country to have something now to point to, talk about what we got to stop. And and because none of that's discussed really in the media. I've stopped listening to a lot of the alternative stuff. There's a little bit I'll tune into just for certain topics, but I'm starting to see that it's all fed by the same, there's only one real source in the background back there feeding everything. So if you're not someone like us who's taking what's being fed and then trying to give some original commentary on it, well then I think you're just part of the the feeding chain. And so anyway, dozens killed by bombs in Syria, clouding the UN peace session, because I think the UN peace session is meant just to keep this, to bring about for the public view and to exacerbate all the issues that actually exist, right? The fact that Russia's trying to protect its interest in an Alawite community, doesn't even really care. As we talked about last week, one of the articles said whether Assad's in there or not. Might even prefer Assad to step down since he's not as controllable, perhaps, as a future Alawite president, more feeling a little more secure with bound to Russia than Assad, perhaps. Assad knows Russia's going to protect its interests, but Assad's also they're presenting in that article last week, has interests of its own, his own, that go in the face of Russia's interests. So you got a conflict there. And then you have this, of course, Sunni Shia conflict, which I say is the thing that ISIS is. It's the mercenary army to stimulate this Sunni Shia conflict, and it's there to push back on all these Shia territories to make way for this new regime that's coming. And this is the part that I find interesting now, Dad, knowing that it's got years of development. I find that perhaps Turkey is the one that's in the news again this week, more prominent perhaps than any other of the topics going on right now in the world and in the Middle East. Turkey keeps coming up. We've got this this next article I have here. Turkey accuses Russia of new airspace violation, and there's part of me that wants to read these articles because I think that there's meat in them, to be extracted when you go through the line by line sort of propaganda. The way it comes at you is purposeful. But I won't be able to cover as much ground, so, unless someone has an opinion of that, I say read the articles yourself and listen to the commentary and see how it fits for you. But what I found in this was from the 30th. This is yesterday, Saturday, and it's out of the AFP by Fulya Ozerkan, and titled Turkey accuses Russia new airspace violation. And the thing that I found interesting in this is it has all the sort of, to me, the properties of this wag the dog. Russia flatly denies it. Turkey, saber rattles, gonna pay the consequences, And it brings me back to, they bring up, the last time and shooting down that Russian plane, and Russia still has vowed that, Putin's vowed that they're going to pay for that. So, that they're keeping this bad blood running there, Dad. I imagine, in my view of it, Russia's plane was just shot down. Of course, it wasn't violating airspace, because why would any of these pilots invite this high-tech weaponry? I mean, it's all quite computerized and high-tech, so either there's a malfunction of the computer or a purposeful violation. And if Turkey's story about the last one's true, that these guys were being warned and warned and warned and warned, and they're saying, yeah, but we're not over your airspace. Again, there's either some sort of malfunction of equipment, which is a little bit hard to imagine. I'm sure it's possible, but you would think they're up there using, of all the planes they've got, of all the equipment, you'd think they'd be using stuff that works right now. And Turkey shoots them down. Now, that starts this whole international incident. Nobody's ready to go to war over it yet, but it's, the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. It's got all, it rings of all this false flag stuff, like I say, setting up the rebels to go fire on the capital. What's the capital going to do? Let the rebels overrun them? Well, they're going to use the army and fire back, especially if it's something as serious as a sort of a cultural genocidal motivation, right? If you know that one side's coming to eliminate the other side from existence, then it's sort of, you have to fight. And so, if you imagine how easy it is to foment these wars in that way by just pushing these buttons, people that have to fight. And so, Russia's not fighting yet, but I think it's telltale for the future. Brought all sorts of weapons in there, following that, all sorts of more dangerous weapons, a promise of sort of a future comeuppance about it, and now Turkey accuses Russia vehemently and rattling the sabers, and we're going to, You know, you're going to pay for it. There'll be serious consequences. Don't you do this. And Russia saying, this is bull. We're not flying over your airspace. So, you know, one of them's lying is what I'm trying to get at. I mean, these kind of accidents, are you serious? Do you just lost a plane? You're on the, you know, the world talking about nuclear war and the threat of war, and you're just going to keep pushing it? So you're either doing that on purpose and lying about being in the airspace, or the other side is lying about you being in their airspace. You know, why would they be doing that? Well, because you want to keep the tension there, is what I'm saying. And so, and why would that be? Well, one of these articles really related it to me today, Dad. I think we'll get to it down the line here. But it had to do with Turkey being the second largest military of the Allied powers in the region, right? They're the big dog at the moment. And it brought to me the idea that, you know, what we're looking for here is this caliphate that's got to come. We know it's got to come. It was promised 100 years ago. The Hashemite king's been saying he's, you know, this is what he expects him to do. It supposedly is, you know, this whole wag the dog propaganda, ISIS illusion is all done under the guise of a caliphate, a self-proclaimed caliphate. I don't think that's an accident. So who's going to be that caliphate is the thing. I think Turkey is still either being promised or right? They think they're in the running, or they're being told they're the front runner, perhaps. I mean, this is what I'm trying to get at this week, Dad, in our watch that to me is a little bit insightful or different, or something to watch that's a little different for me, is that maybe it's not going to be so happen so quickly, so obviously, so clearly that the Hashemite king of Jordan just steps right into this role. I'm not sure yet. This is what I'm questioning now, is how's this all playing out? Because in the end, Daniel says, at the end, it's tidings from the north and east that trouble this guy. Somebody's defeated by China's army and has to regroup. Whether that was one of the past in Daniel 11, I don't really know. Whether we're up to the end time prophecy of Daniel at that point. That might have been something that happened in the past, but it's interesting to note China in Daniel and defeating this king, and the king having to regroup his forces. So that either already happened or that's part of this coming, you know, the way all these wars mount in this coming march toward World War III. But Turkey is certainly, that's where Magog is, right? Gog is the king of Magog. They're not two different places. Gog and Magog. Magog is the place. Gog is the king of Magog. Magog is Turkey, is what I've come to the conclusion. All the different things I've seen taught about Gog and Magog. Gog is Turkey. And it is Turkey that is, this is a major player in this end. This is this is where all these rockets are going to launch from on Armageddon. And why? See, because Turkey's trying to be the next ruler in that world and thinks they've got the stuff, whether that's because of what's being come down to them from above, is what I imagine. They're being told they got the stuff. They're being they're being played. Their strings being pulled. But anyway, so I've been trying the last few weeks, what's this thing with Turkey and Russia? Why are they teasing Russia? Why does NATO have to use Turkey? Why is Turkey? Because Turkey's making a big dog play for the region. Russia was already promised Constantinople at World War One, and it was taken from them, and so they were stabbed in the back, and that whole country was hijacked essentially. To That's a whole other discussion, Dad, but that's the history of it. They were promised Constantinople, and their army was within an arm's length of it when the Bolshevik Revolution changed everything. And same happened to the Hashemites. They weren't promised Constantinople because that was supposed to go to Russia, but they were promised Syria and Iraq, the Levant, and all that area as their territory and their caliphate. So, you have to keep that in mind. I mean, to me, that's all perfectly present to the people who are on the scenes today. Just like American history is, John F. Kennedy's murder is still present to political historians. They still make movies about how it was done. So for these people, you must imagine that all of this history is quite close to them still. And whatever deals are being made with the banking powers and the military mights, that's the deal that it's really got to do with. Caliphate, the territory of Iraq and Syria, the territory of Turkey, right? Russia, all these are the areas that are sort of in this future up for grabs. Israel, the Zionistic plan is to rule all that territory, and they're making their play. Turkey, I think, also has a plan to rule that territory. Saudi Arabia, I think, has been told that when the dust settles, you're our boy, right? That's why we send you all the guns. You're going to rule the territory. We'll rule it through you like we always have. Jordan's been told, you're the real Hashemite king. You're going to get the territory back. I mean, that's how I'm starting to picture, how this great war comes about. These people are all playing for that territory, and the people who are pulling the strings, and if it's along the lines of people who are heading toward 3 purposeful world wars that are going to annihilate so much of everybody, if they're on this banking plan from the Rothschilds that's always been to fund both sides of the conflict, that the Iron Mountain report told the powers that be, the military powers, the superpower, how do you keep your superpower in a time of peace? You don't. You keep people afraid of something. You keep at war, or you don't keep your power. So we've stayed at war in the last 50 years. The military machinery keeps pumping out the weaponries. We don't go to peace and peaceful solutions. We keep going to more war and hostility. And so, is that by accident, Dad? Is that just happening because that's just sort of the way we're fumbling through? The way every country's politicians, they're doing their best. Everybody's trying to end war, end famine, end heartache and hardship, but we just keep fumbling through at this pace of constant aggression and war, and spending our, even the impoverished nations like North Korea spending all their money on military weaponry. So anyway, here's another piece of the puzzle that I haven't referred to in a while. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict. That's what got us into all this. I remember when I was first sailing south in 2007, and that's what, so almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago now, getting on 9 years ago. every day the front of the papers were how many people were killed, how many, all the suicide bombers and the constant Israel-Palestinian lobbing bombs back and forth. That was what was on the front page of the paper, along with the oil prices dropping back then. That's when the oil prices were also dropping, was at that time. So, but since then, as I've said, funny how this crisis that had reached such a crisis point, then they were able to pull back. Where are all the suicide bombers? What's happened? I mean, I know there's still the ongoing violence, but nothing like 20 years ago. It's not headline stuff anymore. So here's a headline from today, AFP, no name on it. Netanyahu criticizes French threat to recognize Palestinian state. So now the French as a state are saying, if these peace talks fail this time, we're going to go ahead and just recognize them as, start doing business with them, put them on the books as far as we're concerned as their own state. And so Netanyahu's saying, hey, you're not helping anything there. Now you're not giving them any incentive to compromise, right? Well, I don't want to open that whole can of worms, depending on where you stand on that issue, but my view of it after all these years now, Dad, and it's changed quite a bit in the last couple of years. I've done a lot of research, and my view now is that Israel has been made the terrorists in the region to offset the other, the Muslim terrorists that have been made in the region. So the Israel stance as this hard line is not because they need it to protect themselves. It's because the strings that are being pulled by the people that make all the weapons and loan them all the money and promote this Zionism for 100 years to take over that part of the world, if that's the play on that, on the sort of Professor Carol Quigley type of view of the world, the bankers that are trying to run and own the world, and they're going to do it by destroying all the people that have a right to that land, the real indigenous people, through rising up a terrorist state and another terrorist to oppose them, and bringing that to through constant war, to a point of to constant conflict, to a point of a great war. I mean, that's basically what has been predicted, and so I don't know, is that what's going on? But so obviously, the state of Israel, who cannot be considered in any way, have taken a peaceful route to anything from the time that before the state was established, and the things that were going on in that territory with their Arab neighbors over this, this new English influence. And then since the establishment of the state and all the heavy weaponry and all this kind of thing that's been going on in Israel, and the expansion of it militaristically into this Mossad run, who's more hard ass than Israel in the world, right? So this is not a soft group of people, and the Palestinians are over there, pretty much what have they got? They're launching rocks, and they've got knives, and you know what I mean? Their funding comes in the way of rice and basic necessities, and you know what I mean? They're not on any level to be compared. It's like a bunch of school children, pounding up against the door of the federal police. There might be a lot of kids, and some of them might be pretty tough, and they might be able to do a little bit of damage, but they're mowed over, whenever the police get roused. So, in that sense, that's my view of it, is that you're looking at a purposefully created terrorist state, and that's why there's never any love going on with their neighbors, is because they're not there to create any love, or there perhaps could be honest negotiations. There could be some way to share the land and all those sort of things. So I think that's all been done on purpose. And so anyway, the French are finally at the point, and I say that's because in recognition of the fact, not just because they can sell Palestine some stuff. I mean, that might be a little bit of motivation, but how much money's Palestine got to spend on French stuff until they get their state and the funding from the world? I think for now it's in recognition of the fact that historically it can't really be denied the sort of hardship the Palestinians are going through at the hands of Israel, and that all of the posturing and procrastinating is only costing, it's just too much now. It's not justifiable in the cost of human life and suffering in this quest for a Palestinian state. It's time to start by giving them a state and negotiate from, where they have some form of strength or something solid. So anyway, I think that what I've learned over the last few years is that is how bad it is, and it's become so bad that the French have said, okay, either you guys budge, you Israelis budge on this, or we're going to acknowledge them. We're going to recognize their state. So anyway, that's, I say, part of the puzzle now coming together in excuse me, in what we're looking for some righteous king to come along and make a difference here that's going to cause this whole messiahship to happen. And I say that Palestinian issue is going to play an issue. I'm not sure what yet, right? Because the real issue is the rebuilding of the temple. The real issue is that land and the caliphate. That's what's really going on in the world right now. The Palestinian thing with Israel has got to do with, with land expansion, essentially. Israel doesn't want to have to give up land that it owns, that it's getting taxes off of, that it's, in its view, it's all going to be part of their land. So what's the point of giving it to the Palestinians only to take it back? And that's why I think all the procrastinating. And for the Palestinians, again, in the worldview of pulling strings, from the Carroll Quigley view, it provides a constant thorn, a constant reason to keep hostility with no solution, which is what's been going on for 20 years to bring us to today, is what I'm saying. But 20 years ago, it was just that. Now you got Turkey and Russia and ISIS and, Iraq's a mess, Afghanistan's a mess, Egypt's a mess, Libya's a mess. I mean, the whole region is, 20 years ago, it was just, what are we going to do about Israel and Palestine? So, next article, Dad, from Saturday, the 30th of January, AFP article by Fulya Ozerkan. Edrogan eyes expanding Turkey influence on Latin American tour. And now this one knocked me over. I wasn't expecting this one. But it's what got me thinking, Dad, that what we're looking at is a Turkey that has ideas to being the future spokesperson for Islam, the future moderate, NATO-backed caliphate Muslim empire. That's what I'm seeing in all this. So that he's on this tour here. I guess a few years ago, or a couple years ago, again, I don't have to read the whole article because I'll run out of time now, but he went to Mexico and some of the other Latin American countries, and now he's down to Ecuador and Peru, and he's signing them up, showing what a pal Turkey is. And it's interesting to me. I mean, Turkey's a Muslim country, and here he is in Catholic countries. Now, my position. I see us as, these are the only two people that acknowledge Jesus as the Messiah of the Jews that's going to come again and rule the world. So I don't see a conflict, but in the sense of the way the propaganda is always played, and in the modern day, it's odd to me that Turkey feels a need to go make ties. I mean, what do they have in common, see? What do they have in common except a a future of trade relations in a world that is sort of unified under the, you know, the one God, the new world one God sort of whatever this abomination that they set up on the wing of the temple. Everybody worships the same God, and we're going to make an image of that God, and we all agree to worship that as God. Something like that. And Turkey's in for that, no problem, right? We can still be Islam and all that, but we acknowledge that Allah is the same God as every other God. And of course, I think that's what leads to this war, Dad, is nobody really believes that inwardly. That's the whole nature of religion, isn't it? You think the God you know is got to be God, and the God someone else knows must just be because they don't know God. But anyway, however that plays out, it would seem that, when you look at the false prophet's going to get everybody to worship this image set up, and bow and pray to this image. What image could that be? What's going on in the world? But this push for the monotheistic religions to sort of stop fighting and unite. And on the other side is this hard line, the presentation of the hard line, like the Sharia, this ISIS. No way, no no way can these religions meld together. And so the hard line of the Talmudic is the same way, which nobody talks about. But of course, the Talmudic vision is that everybody else is simply working for the Jews anyway. God's put them all there to be servants to them eventually. So I'm saying, if you look at it, this other conflict, that if someone's stirring the pot, if I'm from the Carol Quigley version, if I'm paying the bills and I'm stirring the pot and I'm supplying the guns, I'm telling Turkey, yeah, you want to be the new Ottoman Empire? You want to be the next big shot that represents the world through your vision? We're going to back you. Tell us what you need. Here's the plan, right? And the Talmudic Jews, the Zionistic Jews, the plan for 100 years with these guys. We're going to get that land from the Euphrates to the Nile. It's all going to be for Jehovah and for the Jews, and we're going to show the rest of those Gentiles their place in the world, right? And then you got, what, for Russia? There's a change coming, right? That's why we're not rebuilding America. That's why we're just letting it deteriorate. Those guys are temporary. That's the temporary time, right? There's going to be a future time. Russia's the future strength of this part of the world. And then, of course, America, the strings being pulled there. Great and free America. Got the military and the attitude to go out and straighten out everybody's problems. Let's go to it. Superpower. Get that superpower in line. Pull those strings according to the military industrial complex and the multinational corporations. See, and so everybody's pitted against each other simply by where you fund whose vision of the future. And as long as you're funding both the Zionistic vision and Turkey's vision and the Hashemites' vision and America's vision and Russia's vision, and you're balancing that funding so no one can ever quite reach there, but has to keep striving to get the carrot you're holding out before them. Anyway, I'm starting to see how it could be done. So Turkey, Latin American tour. I just thought, well, that's kind of interesting. He's in the middle of a fracas with Russia, with ISIS. I mean, is he? How confident are we, saying we Latin America, that I'm going to be dealing with a Drogan in Turkey in the future? I mean, buddy, don't you got some concerns back home that you're out? I mean, what are you talking to us about? Trade deals and this kind of shit. Do I know that what kind of time frame we talking about here? What kind of shape's Turkey going to be in if Russia goes to war against you? See? So what does he know? Or what do the people that are sending him or bidding him to get out there and make these contacts, what sort of vision are they on? Because it doesn't seem to be one of living day to day like Assad. Assad's not over making Latin American ties, right? So anyway, I thought that was an interesting article that points to a Turkey who feels very strong, and that also jibes with the scripture that points to a threat at the end that comes from the north and a Magog at the end that has the sort of power scripture talks about. So here he is out, on a world tour at this time. Okay, next article, Dad, is out of Reuters from today, from Sunday. State-of-the-art subterfuge, how Iran kept flying under sanctions. Now, I really find this to be an amazingly enlightening article, though it's really about how their airline industry kept going. Because they were under sanctions, nobody could supply them with new airplanes, airplane parts, all those sort of things. They couldn't buy that stuff. So they've had to patch together their planes and black market buy stuff through other people, right? Other countries that they would set up a front to go, yeah, we need a few Airbuses. And they'd get the Airbuses sold and they'd sell them or transfer them to a company in another country, and they'd wind up in Iran. And of course this article saying, of course, that was frowned upon in the international community that had sanctioned them, and so there were penalties if you got caught doing that. So it minimized. It wasn't just like they were able to build a fleet that way. They were barely able to scrape by because they just couldn't get parts for the damn planes. And apparently they claim, this article claims, this is an article by Tim Heffer, by the way, from Sunday in Reuters, if you want to check this article out. It claims that, it brought him a very dangerous and poor safety record, right? Stuff happened because they couldn't keep their planes up like any other aeronautical industry. They couldn't get replacement parts for their airplane industry, and they had to patch it together. This whole makeshift black market industry of the most patched together planes in the world. And this article points out that that's how they got by. And what it made me wonder is how, if that's if that's how hard it was for their airline industry, how hard would it be, you'd think, for their weapons industry? I mean, did we let Japan or Germany or Cuba how many people does America, the great superpower, let have weapons like Israel or Saudi Arabia? Right? Very few. Screaming about Iran's nuclear program. Yeah, but under sanctions, if nobody can sell them any parts and they can't even keep their planes in the air, I mean, what kind of army can you run against Israel when Israel's got their own, when Israel is the arms manufacturer? What kind of threat is it really? It just got me thinking, Dad. These years under sanctions, if it was that hard for them to keep planes flying, how hard would it be to keep tanks rolling, to keep up on new tanks, on new, missiles, on new missile defense systems, on, all that kind of stuff. If people weren't allowed to sell it to you, so I guess Iran makes all their own stuff, but, where do they buy the raw materials from? I don't know. I'm just saying they make all their own weapons, but they can't make their own airplane parts, huh? I mean, it just struck me that the sanctions, practically crippled their airline industry's capability to do anything but to hold on. survive tooth and nail. And it just made me think, wow, wonder what it did to the military industry and why Iran is so scary when the fact was, you had to be afraid to book a flight if you were an Iranian to get on the Iranian airlines. You had to think, oh God, here we go, Allah, get me to the mosque on time. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. This article today out of Reuters, how it's showing, Iran's airline industry was so affected, so crippled in its ability to keep up, and how they've just now ordered all these new airplanes because they finally can. So anyway, nothing about guns. Don't know where they get their guns. Okay, one of the other pieces of the puzzle we've been talking about, Dad, and I really do think it's an important one, is the immigrants. It's you notice it hasn't led to the terrorism like we've talked about and we're afraid of and threatened with, right? Remember a few months ago with all this is we're sneaking terrorists in with the migrants, right? Remember how I said what kind of real terrorists would give off their hand like that unless it was to just confuse you or fool you or get you to chase your tail, right? So that the most likely explanation of the time was that if it's really from the terrorists, it's probably a red herring anyway, because why would you set yourself up to make it harder for yourself by telling, you're theoretically being the terrorists are the ones that have lesser resources than the superpower you're trying to terrorize. And so why would you give them any more ammunition by announcing that unless that was just to, draw them into a game of wasting their money for no reason, which is what it seems to perhaps have proven to be, since here we are months down the road, and I don't recall any of these incidents being connected to the migrants. But now we've got German conservatives address concerns about migrants as support wanes. And this is also out of Reuters from today, from Sunday, by Michelle Martin. And they're pointing out that 1 million people have come in, some 1.1 million migrants streamed into Germany, and regions and communities have complained that they're being overwhelmed. Concerns about crime and security have also mounted since men of North African and Arab appearance assaulted women in Cologne at New Year. Funny, concerns about crime and security have mounted. Well, I mean, this has been going on months, right? I'm saying they were announcing they were going to send terrorists in with the migrants months ago. And now concerns about crime and security have mounted since this incident, which I read, Dad. I don't have the article, but I read it when I was going through this week's articles, that this 13-year-old girl that they claimed was raped apparently was not, was put up to it. I mean, apparently this was a planted story. I don't know the facts of it, but there was an article that this supposed rape in Cologne in New Year's was really just a false flag. And yet this article today is still quoting out of it as if, right, they're still getting mileage off that. Concerns about crime and security have also mounted. Mounted? You mean since the time they claimed they were sending terrorists in? Watch out, Europe. We're coming after you. We're sending terrorists in with all these migrants. You can't stop us. You're in trouble. But now concerns have mounted since one person was raped on New Year's. And that turns out to be perhaps a false accusation, or at least there's an article to that effect. Anyway, so the only reasonable thing I found in this is what I've been saying, haven't I, Dad? The next paragraph in here says, Chancellor Angela Merkel said most refugees from Syria and Iraq would go home once the conflicts there had ended, and urged other European countries to offer more help because the numbers need to be reduced even further and must not start to rise again, especially in spring. And it shows that her party is down a couple of percentage points now, with the more conservative party that wants to shoot everybody. Not everybody, but I remember that from this article. I wanted to find that spot there. I thought, wow, okay, that's here we go. The AfD, that's the other party, Alternative for Germany. Concerns about migrants have boosted support for the right-wing Alternative for Germany. The AfD has struck a tough tone on immigration, and leader Frauke Petry said in an interview published on Saturday that migrants entering illegally should, if necessary, be shot. So, that's the other side of the coin. So I've been saying that, the whole migrant thing is there to foment that division, divide and conquer, to get people divided. Now, I expected there was going to be a lot more death and false flag events to galvanize that. And I still say that all of this, over the years, I see, Dad, that it always looks so bright to us that it appears to be right there in front of us. In fact, I was talking with someone the other day about in the ocean, when the ocean is super, super clear, things appear to be very close that aren't, like the bottom even. You can look in very clear water in like 100 or 200 feet of water, and the reef appears to be just right. It looks like it's 20 feet down. It really does. It's so big and bright, and it just looks like it's right there. And you start to swim, and you're swimming, and you're swimming, and you're swimming, and as you get 20 feet down, you realize you start to see the water above you out of your peripheral vision, and you realize that the reef hasn't even gotten any closer. You haven't even moved an inch closer to it, really. And so I'm starting to see that that's now how it feels to me when I look at these events that are happening, Dad. It's all leading to a war that's coming, as I say, at least 10 years from now, that won't start probably till 5 years or more from now, right? So all of the things we're seeing are leading up to that. The war with Russia. It's not going to happen. I keep seeing that. It's not happening in the near future. It's not in the near term. It's happening in the near future, but the future. And same thing with this refugee thing. I think we still have to see the crisis from that's going to lead to more of a galvanization of war, what brings about the war and the Armageddon type of commitment for people to get their soldiers over there and kill those Muslims, right? And them seeming to have a real opportunity in the world, because all of a sudden all these cells that snuck in with refugees years before are going to start active. And at that time the world will be terrorized because it seemed like it all calmed down. And now all of a sudden they're gaining this power and they're able to start terrorizing people all over the world. I don't know, Dad, but otherwise it doesn't make sense to me. Somehow we got to get to this war. Somehow this scourge that brings the whole world to a war, if it's going to happen that way. And it seems like it is, whether you're looking at Carol Quigley or William Carr's perspective. It seems like it has to happen that way. So anyway, this the refugee issue, at least Merkel said what I've been saying for so long. I mean, these people are going to want to go home. So that's what you should really be working on, is how to sort of register them on a temporary basis, find out who really can't wait to get back home the minute the peace is settled in Syria, because the facts are not everybody can just stay in Germany. You can visit and pay money. You can work if you're qualified in a particular sector, But there's, once peace is there, asylum seekers won't be able to just stay indefinitely. If you started making people aware of that from the minute you brought them in and said, here's a bowl of soup, and here's what's going on, printed in Aramaic or whatever language you need to print it in so that they can all read it and see, oh, okay, here's what's going on, right? They're going to give us this much soup. If we're sick, they're telling us go over here. If we want to apply for work visas, they're telling us, get in this line, right? Just sort of, there's still no journalism on that, Dad. How many of these people want to go home? How many want to stay and work? How many are there for asylum? How many were forced out? That kind of stuff. So that there's a handle on this 1 million asylum seekers, and what the real uh, perspective is on sorting out the problem, as I'm saying. But anyway, at least she brought up the point that it's a lot of these people want to go back, and so it's not a matter of making room for all of them. But the migrant problem is still making the front pages. Last week we talked about how threatening to ruin the freedom of the EU, the whole idea of the EU, and Germany now is focused, become focused. Where a couple of months back that was just they were saying, "Come on, stop making a big deal out of this," and now it's becoming a political focus there. And so I say it hasn't done what I've expected exactly, but yet I say it's because that reef is still so far away. I swam down the 20 feet, but I didn't realize the reef is so far away. It's just that the perspective is a little deeper, and that the sort of things that have to come out of the terrorism that I'm expecting from the migration and all the other things still is in the future. It still has to come at its time, and the time is not yet. That's all that I can imagine in seeing it in the context that I'm seeing, is that we're still just laboring toward it. I mean, look how long we've been in Afghanistan. What's actually gone on over there, except for the heroin production having gone right back up and peaked out, and it's sort of high as it's ever been. But other than that, I mean, what's gone on in 15 years of occupying Afghanistan and Iraq, these ruined countries? So you see how long it takes, Dad, for for us to move through these motions that somebody is funding. That's what I keep, just remember that. Somebody builds these guns. Somebody funds these poor countries to have more money in weaponry than they have in GDP, right? So, and let's see if I still have a couple of minutes. I have an article here from AFP, also from Sunday. Army of Islam member, chief opposition negotiator heads to Syria talks. Now, we read about that in the first article. I think that this Army of Islam, this is the article, Dad, that pointed out that that they're backed by Saudi Arabia, this Army of Islam, and it brought up the troubling nature of the fact that, not everybody sees this person as legitimate. So they're, we've got this Saudi-backed, which for me means American terrorists. That's who these are. This is the Sunni terrorists, basically, that, you might as well to me be saying ISIS. This is your, the same money that's funding ISIS is funding this guy through Saudi Arabia, Army of Islam. In other words, this is a Sunni extremist military group that they're fighting against the Shia military of Syria, trying to overthrow Assad, right? So until they were given the money, they couldn't do that. Now, as far as I know, America and Saudi Arabia have had the money to fund these guys for quite some time, right? Assad's family's been in there for what now? 3 generations, 3 decades. So, how come we haven't funded these people before? How come Saudi Arabia hasn't? Why now is what I'm trying to say. What did Assad do? Just like what did Gaddafi do? How bad did it get? Show me the evidence. We already know the first trumped up thing with the chemical gas. Oops, that was sent by guys like this. The rebel armies, right? The ones that America and Saudi Arabia are funding. That's who was launching chemical gas. Oops. So this is who you're going to negotiate with now? This is who's going to be in charge of Syria? The people that are launching chemical gas? And that's what Russia's pointing out. Just because they're anti-Assad doesn't make them non-terrorists. And so you've got this quagmire, is what I'm seeing, Dad, in Syria. I don't think we're going to get a peaceful solution in Syria. I think that's all talk for more war. I think the reason they set it at an 18-month perspective is because they got a lot of warring left to do over there, and they're going to do it under the guise of peace negotiations. Everybody's trying to get to peace, so we got to ramp up the war effort. I mean, didn't we just read last week? We're talking boots on the ground over there. So what do we expect? We're going to come out of Geneva and go, we don't need boots on the ground. The terrorists from Saudi Arabia, the Army of Islam guy, and the terrorists that he accuses Assad's regime to be, they worked it out. Everybody's friends now, right? No more war. So I don't see how that's going to happen. Because Russia's not going to go for whatever these guys want, for the most part. I mean, that'll be the question, I suppose, Dad. When's a Sunni representative going to come up with what Russia needs in Syria? And I think that's going to be the secret in this next part of the whole equation that we're watching for. And that's what Turkey's vying for, I think. Although, see, they're on the wrong side of that now. And that's what the Hashemite king's going to be on the right side of. He's going to be able to come on saying, you know what? I'm a Sunni leader. I don't got a problem with Russia having their military bases in Syria. I don't got a problem with these, moderate relations with Israel, with moderate relations with Turkey, with moderate relations in Egypt, probably, as I imagine how it'll start. And then because of what's going on in Egypt and Saudi Arabia with the extremists, Sunnis that don't want his caliphate, the world will be all thrilled to have him go take those extremists out, like this guy that they're sending to the talks right now for Army of Islam. So I mean that's why I don't see how this quagmire in Syria can actually be solved right now, Dad. They have to keep blowing stuff up until they declare us, somebody's got to win. The Sunnis have to either pull back and say, okay, the Shias can have that part of Syria, we'll take this part, right? And I imagine that's what they're going to tell us they're talking about, or that's what the pretense of these talks are. But I say they're still fighting over the very areas that they would have to agree to share. And so anyway, it doesn't look like there's going to be a peaceful solution to me. I would be surprised if that comes about now. I would say that we have to keep going down this road of war because that's what pushes the need for a peaceful solution. And I still say it's got to start threatening Israel. And I'm still at a loss, Dad. How's Israel going to get threatened when, at this moment, when Iran not only, doesn't have any nuclear capability, but they don't have any money to keep their planes flying. Nobody's talking about Iran's army, just Russia's army, but Russia isn't threatening Israel. So where's the threat to Israel going to come from that's going to make somebody able to give them stability and and proclaim that person their Messiah. So, I suppose we could say it's just the fact that he's ready to give them their temple and not go to war with them that could make, perhaps there's already enough threat in the region. I mean, I'm just trying to figure how the pieces are in place. But I say that, there's not enough tension. I've been saying it for some time. This whole thing has to escalate now a little further. They're talking peace because there's going to be more war this year. And Sheikh Hussein believes it's going to be nuclear war already this year. I differ on that account, Dad. I don't think we're coming to nuclear war this year. I would be very surprised. Doesn't seem that the prophecies are being fulfilled at that, to me, in my interpretation. I see that this white horse has to come. The 7-year covenant with many has to come. That covenant has to allow the Jews to rebuild their temple. This white horse king, which I'm more and more sure represents a righteous warrior, not a peace covenant necessarily. Even if the righteous warrior suggests a peace covenant or certain peaceful covenants or peaceful solutions to things. What Revelation's telling us is he's going to be a righteous warrior that's given a crown to go forth conquering. That's what we got to watch for. So, and my money's not on Turkey's king. My money's still on Jordan's king. He's the Hashemite king. He's the guy that said he speaks for Islam. He's the guy that says Islam is moderate and not extremist, right? He's at war with ISIS. So, that we haven't seen that part of the equation, Dad, but that's easy to watch for. 7-year covenant, given a crown, going forth conquering. So anyway, I see that's what we, that's in the forefront now. It's like that reef, though. It's still, how long away is it? How far down is that? It looks like it's only 20 feet away. It looks like it's right there in front of us. But I'm cautioning people, to keep watching it with an eye toward the context and don't get drawn into the propaganda, peace talks and all this kind of bull. ISIS is losing ground. It only takes one bomb to blow up somewhere. Al-Qaeda wasn't even a term we spoke about anymore before 9/11, if you think about it. When's the last time Al-Qaeda was a big deal that anyone was worried about, right? Then all of a sudden planes fly into buildings and, Al-Qaeda, and we're at war with Afghanistan and Iraq, so just remember how it happens. It doesn't take but one thing, one declaration of ISIS, which of course is false flag. Understand, when I say ISIS, I mean basically, black army for the arms makers, black army for the powers that be in the Carroll Quigley version, for the bankers that own all the arms manufacturers, that own all the presidents of all the countries. This is their army to go get something done. What could it be? Push those Shias back so they can make way for their white horse king, who then they can let go forth conquering and to conquer when they gave him the caliphate crown. That's the way I'm still seeing it, Dad. So anyway, thanks for having me on the show, and talk to you next week.
Well, Tony, I think you're exactly right, and it was another superb analysis of this week's happenings in the news in the Middle East. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the show today. And give us a little feedback. Go to BroSal.org on YouTube or the Philadelphian Church on YouTube. And comment, drop us a line, subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing and you want this to continue, drop us a frankincense offering. There's a button right up on the right-hand corner of the title to keep this ministry and the word coming to you. And for Tony, I'm Brother Sal. Till next week, we want you to have a great day in Christ. Thank you.